So like I said, like this guy's one of my best friends in the entire world, and we had spent so much time together. He'd always been my interpreter going into Burma. And so on one particular day, we were with a larger group of the freedom fighters, and they told me, they were like, hey, we're going to do this attack. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll provide medical support. Because there was, and when I say attack, the bad guys were behind enemy lines. The bad guys were in this particular position, and so these villages were abandoned, and they wanted to get rid of the bad guys, right? Because these bad guys were firing mortars into the villages and, again, raping and murdering everybody, and it's awful. So I said, okay, I'll provide medical support. So I went and I was with their medic. And so then I had to be vague on some of the details here because it was a pretty major thing that they did at the time. But anyway, so this massive battle erupts. There's mortars and machine gun fire and bombs going off everywhere, and there's just it's total carnage and mayhem. And during that time, one of the guys who we were working with had been shot through the knee. And I wasn't with him at the time when that happened, so I wasn't able to treat him at that moment. But so this big, very, very chaotic battle happens, and we have to pull back. Ultimately, our guys are not really successful in their objective. And so it's about 2 hours later, and I come across the one guy who had been wounded, he'd been shot through the knee. So I go and check him. And so he actually had two medics with him at that point, two of the local trained medics. And so I went and looked at this guy, but he'd been shot in the leg, and I thought, I was like, but his face was super pale. And I was like, this guy looks like he's about to die. He looks like he's about to go into shock. He's losing a ton of blood. So, and I go and I look at his injury. Well, the medics hadn't actually cut his pants open to look at the injury. They hadn't even physically looked at it. And also they had put two tourniquets on, but they had basically used bandanas and sticks to try to make as tourniquets, and they put that on over his pants. And so I opened up this guy's leg with my trauma shears, and there's, man, I don't even know, there's like 1.5 liters of blood just sitting there. And he's actually on a stretcher that Stronghold had provided. I'd brought like a rolled up combat litter, like a Skedco. And so he's on that, and so there's this huge pool of blood that just comes gushing out of his pants. And I look at his injury, and I can see there's bone fragments hanging out of the exit injury, and I'm watching the blood physically like come out of the injury. It's like oozing out. It's like a faucet that's just turned on very lightly. And he's been bleeding like this for at least 2 hours at this point.
Fuck.
Because there's still sort of sporadic fighting going on, but it's not like as heavy as it was before. So he's been bleeding out like this for 2 hours for a very simple injury. So I immediately pull out my tourniquet, put it on the guy, ratchet it down, and I watch the blood just stop flowing. And I was like, okay, you're good, you're all solid. And so then the medics took him and they evacuated him. And his story is important, very important, because it'll come up later. So this simple tourniquet and simple training that I have was able to save this guy's life. So that's why I was saying that the training and stuff that Stronghold is doing is so vitally important, because you have actual medics who aren't able to save this guy's life just because you didn't expose the injury, you didn't actually look at it, you didn't actually stop the bleeding. And so this guy 100% would have died had I not been there. And so that's why the training and providing them proper supplies, like just tourniquets and things, is so important. And there's so many injuries and so many people die from this stuff. So anyway, that guy leaves, he gets evacuated, and there's still a little bit of fighting, and but nothing super crazy at the moment. And so at the time, I actually had two interpreters with me. We had a new interpreter, and I was trying to get to know him more. That's why I brought him along during this particular portion of the trip. And so I was in one of the villages talking with him, and we were talking with some of the guys and just sort of discussing this fighting that was going on and like what they were going to do next and whatnot. Well, my main interpreter, Babo, he went with some of the resistance guys, and they were going to go blow something up. And he wanted to go watch and take a picture of it, right? Because there's going to be this big explosion, and so they were going to go blow up a small bridge. And that's the bridge that the bad guys use to transport all their trucks and all their resources and stuff in there to cause all their mayhem. So he wanted to go watch this and take a video of it. Well, a few minutes later, after he left, this huge explosion goes off. The bridge is blown up, And then within 10 seconds, I hear on the radios, the local language, and they're saying his name. And I knew immediately at that point something bad had happened. And so, sure enough, my other interpreter, he came up to me and said, "Hey, Babo's injured, and it's really, really bad." And at that time, there were no more medics because the medics had been treating this other wounded guy and had evacuated him. So, keep in mind, like, this is, again, I know I say this a bunch of times, but Babo is like one of my best friends in the world. He's like one of the most loyal, like the most loyal person you'll ever meet. He and I have been through hell and back together. We spent years together working in Burma. And so at this moment, I'm trying not to, like, I'm literally trying not to break down and cry, because I just know, I know this is bad. I know this isn't going to end well. And so it took us about 30 or 40 minutes. I was the only medic, and I'm not a medic. I was just basic TCCC qualified. And so it took us a while to get out to him. Eventually we found him. And when I came up to him, he was on the ground. Someone had sort of bandaged his head up a little bit, but basically a portion of his brain was hanging out of his head. He was still alive, unconscious, and he was covered in blood and vomit. And he was, and I looked down and I looked, and they had taken like off his overshirt, because he had like a long sleeve shirt on, and under that shirt he had actually been wearing his Stronghold t-shirt. So at that point, everybody looks at me and they go like, what do we do? What do we do? And we of course have to evacuate him. And so we had a second litter there as well. So I pulled out the litter, and I just immediately started telling the interpreter, started giving everyone instructions. Hey, put him here, put him on the, get him on this stretcher, and we're going to start transporting him out of here. Now, at this point, now keep in mind, there is no medical evacuation service. There is nothing. It doesn't exist. This is why we're putting in the jungle ambulance. But our jungle ambulances are still miles and miles and miles away. It's completely impossible. There's no road even for our ambulances to get to us. The ambulances actually don't even exist yet. They're still in preparation. So you have this critically injured patient, and I'm not a medic, but I have to deal with it, and we have to get him out of there. So we get him onto a litter. We load him into the back of a truck. A local villager came and put their truck in there. And so I told a couple of guys who were with me, who were like my assistants, I said, he's going to vomit. He's going to continue to vomit. And so when he does that, we need to tip him on his side. And I gave a guy a pair of gloves, and I was like, if he starts choking, you need to clear out his airway, because at this point I couldn't do anything for him. I had no IVs. I couldn't give him oxygen. I just have a basic med kit. So I said, all we can do is keep his airway clear.
Had he been shot in the head, or did the explosion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, he had been hit with shrapnel from the explosion, because he just didn't have his head down far enough.
So I mean, it was essentially kind of a blue on blue almost. I mean, it was
it was definitely a friendly explosion. It wasn't the bad guys that hit him. But
it's fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely awful. So we get him in this truck, and we start transporting him out of there. And sure enough, he starts to vomit, and it's really hard for me to talk about this, but I need to tell the story. So he starts to vomit. He starts to kick his leg. So he starts to violently kick his leg, but he's unconscious. And so I'm thinking he's having some sort of neurotic, not neurotic, but I don't know, some sort of neurological. Thank you. Some sort of neurological response. So he starts kicking his leg, and then after he starts kicking his leg, then he starts to vomit. So we tip him on his side, clears airway. And this happens multiple times when we're in the back of this truck. We travel maybe, 30 minutes or so, and then that's the end of the road. And then we have to carry him. There's another like 5 or 6 miles we have to carry him to get him to the next road, basically. And so there's myself and like 3 or 4 other guys. And so I'm thinking, oh man, we're gonna have to carry him for 5 or 6 miles. It's gonna take forever, but whatever, we'll drag him, we'll make it happen. We got a Skedco, we're good to go. But when the road ended, waiting at the end of the road were 26 men from the local village who had heard that he was injured, and they were there to volunteer their time to come and help carry him.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is the tribe that were there to help and that we're there to work with. And so 26 of these guys show up. And they refused to let me carry. I would grab the litter and they would like almost like fight me, like, no, dude, we got this. And so for the next 5 or 6 miles, they wouldn't let me or my other guys who were with me help carry, and they just insisted. And so they just, every couple minutes, they would shift and they would take turns carrying, and they'd hand carry. Anyway, so we get across. It's while this is going on, it takes the total evacuation process took like probably 6 hours or so with this critically injured patient, and we're carrying him through the heat of the day. It's Burma. It's hot, and there's no wind. We're just getting baked out there. And so we eventually get him. And of course, every few minutes he would kick his leg. He would kick his leg, and then he would vomit. And he would kick his leg, and he would vomit. And so this happened over and over again. So we eventually got him to a road where we could wait for another truck to come and take us deeper into the jungle, where we could get him to a medic. And they asked me. They said, "Do you want to wait here for the truck, or do you want to keep walking?" And I was like, "No, we keep walking. We're going to cut as much time as possible. I want to give." I know there's like a 99% chance he's going to die, but I was like, but for that 1% chance, I was like, no, we're going to keep working. We're going to do everything we possibly can to keep him alive. And so we kept walking along this road. Eventually a truck came and met us, and then we went into the jungle. So when we went into the jungle, deeper into the jungle, there was myself and a sort of a higher level medic, maybe like EMT level paramedic kind of guy. And so we go deeper into the jungle, and it's just myself and 2 or 3 other guys in the back of this truck. And I'm absolutely just emotionally like destroyed. I just can't even believe what's happening. And so he keeps on kicking, and I'm like, why? Like, he keeps on kicking, and then he would vomit and stuff. And eventually he just started kicking a bunch but wouldn't vomit. I think he'd vomited everything that he had. And so there's nothing I could do to treat him. And so what I did was, as he's kicking, I would rub his leg. That's all I could do, was I would rub his leg and be like, hey man, it's okay. And so I did that. So normally when he would kick like 5 or 6 times, like very, very violently. And he would try to reach up with his right arm and try to pull the bandages off of his head. And so anyway, I rubbed his leg, and when I rubbed his leg, after he only kicked once or twice, he stopped. And I thought, that's strange. And so then a couple minutes later, he starts to kick his leg, and he'd only kick it like once, and I would rub his leg, and then he would stop. And so I don't know for sure, but I think he still had a certain level of consciousness and knew what was going on. He could certainly feel me touching his leg. I don't know if he could hear us. He definitely couldn't see us. His eyes were closed and everything. But I think the violent kicking and stuff that he was doing was because he felt trapped. He was paralyzed and trapped and in pain, and we had nothing to give him. And he was basically suffering, and I think that's why he was kicking his leg before he would vomit, because he knew he was going to vomit, and he was trying to tell us that he was going to vomit. So we get him deep into the jungle. The sun is now about to set, or the sun is now setting. It's dark out there, and we get him to a real medic, one of the local medics who knew what he was doing. He put a pulse oximeter on him, and his O2 sats were so low that it didn't even register. And so I asked the medic, I said, I was like, what are the chances that he survives the night? And the medic said, 20%, maybe. And so at that point, I knew he was going to die. And so, this guy I've worked with for years, and he's my best friend, and he's done, we've done so much together. I know his family and everything. Basically, I just held his feet, and I just started weeping uncontrollably. And all I could say was, I'm sorry, my friend. That's all I could say.
Yeah.
And goodbye. And so we had to leave him. And keep in mind, there's still fighting going on. They have no medics. And at this point, I'm like, well, all right, I'm the medic now, so I'm gonna go back. And so we had to leave him there. And he, that was the last time I saw him alive. And so then we had to repeat the entire trip back. But now it's after dark, so it's another 4, 5, 6 hours to get back to where the fighting's going on. I get back out there. Luckily, no one else has been injured at this point. It's very, very late at night, and we're in this abandoned village, and I maybe get a couple hours of sleep, if that. I wake up the next morning to a message that through their radio channels or whatever. Basically, as soon as I woke up, They told me that he had passed away about 20 minutes before I woke up. And so I started telling people who needed to know. I needed to make sure his wife knew what was going on, and I needed to make sure that just a few other like key leaders, like some of the civilian leadership, needed to know what was going on, because he wasn't just an interpreter. He was a very very well connected sort of individual who did a lot of really, really important things. So I was letting different people know.
How are you communicating with them? Sat phone or local?
There's different ways of communicating. Sometimes it's radios, sometimes it's sat phone, sometimes I'll just borrow somebody's phone if there's cell phone signal. I'll just like borrow their phone and pass messages through that using VPNs and different stuff like that. So you got to get creative with it for sure.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm messaging different people and letting them know what's going on. And as I'm saying these messages, I hear this noise. Doom. And I'm like, I was like, that sounds like a mortar being fired. But at this point, it's completely peaceful. It's completely calm. Nothing's going on. And I stand there and I count to 60. Before I get to 60, boom, this explosion goes off. And then doom, 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 more mortars. Boom, boom, boom. And so the village we were in just started getting bombarded by the Burma army. And we knew immediately, okay, the Burma army, they're counterattacking because of the fighting that the guys had done the day before. And so I'm in like shorts and a t-shirt. I run to my building. I throw my clothes on. I get all my gear packed up. And there's 40 millimeter and mortars and stuff just coming in, just decimating this place. I'm literally like laying on the ground, tying my shoes on my side because I don't want to be up because there's so much shrapnel and metal and stuff flying around everywhere.